on which a recorded vote or the ayes and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Record votes will be postponed. Postponed questions will be taken after 6:30 p.m. today. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 306 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 210, H.R. 306, a bill to direct the Secretary of the Interior to enter into an agreement to provide for management of the free-roaming wild horses in and around the Currituck National Wildlife Refuge.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Sablon, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials under consideration under this bill.
Without objection.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, in 2007, the state of North Carolina, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the County of Currituck, and the Corolla Wild Horse Fund completed a wild horse management plan for the colonial Spanish Mustangs that live on the 7,544 acres of public and private lands in coastal North Carolina. This plan expires in April, and the Fish and Wildlife Service has indicated that they will not sign the 2012 plan. H.R. 306, authored by my friend and classmate Congressman Walter Jones from North Carolina, requires the Secretary of the Interior to enter into a new agreement within 180 days of enactment. It will also stabilize the number of horses to no more than 130, allow the introduction of a small number of Shackelford Bank horses to improve genetic diversity, and will ensure that the Corolla Wild Horse Fund will continue to pay the cost of caring for and managing these horses. Mr. Speaker, these horses are living symbols of our colonial history. H.R. 306 ensures that they will survive in the future at no cost to our taxpayers, and I want to thank my friend from North Carolina for his leadership on this matter, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
And I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 306. H.R. 306, as amended, directs the Secretary of Interior to enter into an agreement with the Corolla Wild Horse Fund, as well as local and state authorities, to provide for the management of the free-roaming wild horses in and around Currituck National Wildlife Refuge. The agreement will increase the cap on the herd size in and around the refuge to 130 horses and specifies what the privately funded Corolla Wild Horse Fund will cover the cost of managing the herd. Catching a glimpse of these horses on the beach is an integral part of what draws thousands of visitors to the North Carolina coast each year. However, the Currituck Refuge was established in 1984 to preserve and protect the native coastal barrier islands ecosystem. The refuge provides essential habitat for migrating waterfowl and endangered species such as piping plover and sea turtles, which also draws visitors to these beaches. It is unusual to protect a non-native species in a wildlife refuge. Extra effort and resources are needed to ensure that the wild herd does not impair the ecosystems for the native animals and plants. The Fish and Wildlife Service needs additional funds to accomplish the conservation purposes of the Currituck National Wildlife Refuge. Additional resources will support staff salaries, since no staff is currently stationed at Currituck National Wildlife Refuge. Corrals to keep the horses from trampling critical habitat, and research to study the potential impacts of these horses on the island's habitats. As we move forward to consider the Fish and Wildlife Refuge Wildlife Service budget later this month, we should examine the operations and maintenance backlog of the National Wildlife Refuge System, which has been chronically underfunded. We must provide the Fish and Wildlife Service adequate funding to preserve all the species in the home of these horses. I thank Mr. Jones for his work in support of the Currituck National Wildlife Refuge and urge adoption of H.R. 306, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 4 minutes to the author of this legislation, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the time, and to the ranking member, thank you for your comments as well. As already been stated, the H.R. 306 would provide for a new public-private management plan for the free-roaming Corolla wild horses of North Carolina's Outer Banks at no cost to our taxpayers. The Corolla horses are colonial Spanish mustangs that can be traced back to the arrival of Spanish explorers on the Outer Banks in the 16th century. They survive in the wild for over 400 years and roam across 7,500 acres of public and private land in coastal Currituck County, North Carolina. Under the existing management agreement between the Interior Department, the state of North Carolina, Currituck County, and the nonprofit Corolla Wild Horse Fund, the maximum number of horses allowed in the herd is 60. Equine genetic scientists believe the number 60 threatens the herd's existence due to high levels of inbreeding and low levels of genetic diversity. To address this issue, H.R. 306 would require a new management plan to allow a herd of no less than 110 horses and no more than 130 horses. 110 is the minimum number that leading equine genetic scientist Dr. Gus Cothram of Texas A&M University has found to be necessary to maintain the herd's genetic viability. It's important to note that these numbers are well within the carrying capacity of the land these horses call home. To improve the herd's genetics, the bill would allow for limited introduction of wild horses from the related herd at Cape Lookout National Seashore. I'd like to emphasize that H.R. 306 requires the Corolla Wild Horse Fund, not the federal government, to pay for managing the herds. The fund is a thriving nonprofit with an annual budget of over $400,000 that is growing each and every year. They already pay the cost of managing the horses, and they will continue to do so under this bill. Confirming this point, the CBO scored on H.R. 306 found that the federal government would incur no significant additional cost to manage or mitigate the effects of horses on the refuge. H.R. 306 is similar to another bipartisan bill that was made reference to a while ago that I authored to create a public-private partnership to save the wild horses of Shackleford Banks and Cape Lookout National Seashore. That legislation passed by the Republican House in 1998 and was signed into law by President Bill Clinton, and I want to at this time acknowledge for the record that his Chief of Staff, Erskine Bowles, was instrumental in that bill becoming law. Mr. Speaker, the Corolla wild horses are a key part of North Carolina's heritage and an important element of the Outer Banks economy. In fact, they're the North Carolina state horse. H.R. 306 has broad bipartisan support, and I want to thank both parties for that support. Among others, it is supported by the North Carolina Governor, Beverly Perdue, Currituck County, and the local community. The Corolla Wild Horse Fund, the Humane Society, the American Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the Animal Welfare Institute, and the Foundation for Shackleford Horses. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I make reference to these posters. These horses have their own heritage, as you can well see. They're absolutely wonderful, beautiful animals. And many times on the coast of North Carolina, when these horses are standing in the ocean with their foal, you will see those tourists come up right to the horse and to the foal and pet them. These horses are part of our heritage, and thank both parties for passing this bill today. I hope that we will pass this bill today, and I thank both sides for this time, and I will yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands.
Mr. Speaker, if I may inquire from the other side if they have any further speakers.
The gentleman yield back. I'm prepared to yield back.
Yeah, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just urge passage of this important piece of legislation for North Carolina and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 306? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds of those being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose, the gentleman from Washington rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2606 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2606, a bill to authorize the Secretary of the Interior to allow the construction and operation of natural gas pipeline facilities in the Gateway National Recreation Area and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Salon, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 2606, introduced by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Grimm, authorizes construction of a lateral pipeline off the coast of New York City. The pipeline will pass under the Gateway National Recreation Area and deliver natural gas to residents of Brooklyn and Queens. Under current law, the National Park Service does not have the authority to approve the pipeline. Therefore, Mr. Grimm introduced H.R. 2606 to allow this project to move forward, benefiting not only New York residents, but visitors to Gateway National Recreation Area. Specifically, as part of the agreement reached with the National Park Service, historic aircraft hangars located at Floyd Bennett Field will be rehabilitated and put into use by the park. And of course, this project will also create much-needed jobs and promote job creation by providing reliable, affordable energy. The City of New York has enthusiastically embraced this proposal and in particular expressed support for the use of the horizontal directional drilling to safely install a 3-mile, 26-inch diameter pipeline. H.R. 2606 has bipartisan support, and of course it is supported by the National Park Service, so I urge its adoption and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this legislation appears to be a good solution to a challenging problem. H.R. 2606 will allow for the delivery of natural gas into an underserved area while also providing a revenue stream that will allow the National Park Service to rehabilitate important historic structures at Gateway National Recreation Area. Representatives Grimm and Mix, who represent Gateway, are to be commended for their hard work on this compromise bill. In the past, some have raised concerns regarding whether it is appropriate for Congress to direct funding to specific projects such as this one. We are pleased to see that when a meritorious project such as this one is proposed, a project which will provide energy resources while also improving historic resources, it is allowed to proceed. We support passage of H.R. 2606 as amended, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to yield 4 minutes to the sponsor of this legislation, the gentleman from Staten Island, Mr. Grimm.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to speak in support of my bill, H.R. 2606, the New York City Natural Gas Supply Enhancement Act. This bill, as was said, will authorize the Secretary of Interior to allow the construction and operation of natural gas pipeline facilities in the New York portion of the Gateway National Recreation Area. I would like to especially thank my colleague and co-sponsor and friend, Congressman Gregory Meeks, for all of his efforts. It was a pleasure to work with him in a bipartisan manner, and we appreciate his staff as well. We'd like to thank the Resources Chairman Hastings, Ranking Member Markey, Subcommittee Chair Bishop, and Ranking Member Grijalva and their staffs for helping move our bill through the committee and on a bipartisan basis for their work with the National Park Service in strengthening the bill as it moved to the House floor. The Park Service deserves our appreciation as well for all of its efforts over the years for improving the Gateway National Recreation Area and in particular reviving the historic Floyd Bennett Field for future generations. This project will be the first bulk natural gas transmission project in Brooklyn, Staten Island, and Queens in more than 40 years. The 5.2 million people living in these 3 boroughs are demanding more and more natural gas. Natural gas, as we all know, is reliable. It's clean, it's domestic, and it's economical. On September 15th of last year, New York City Deputy Mayor Kaz Holloway testified before the National Park Service Subcommittee, and in support of the Grimm-Meeks bill, explained why it was so important. And I'd like to thank Mr. Holloway, the Deputy Mayor, for his efforts. And I would like to draw special attention to some of his testimony. Deputy Mayor Halloway stated, and I quote, "Energy demand in New York City is increasing and will continue to grow." So getting this gateway project done, as Deputy Mayor Halloway said, is a major effort that includes the private sector, the city, the state, and the federal government. This pipeline will pass underneath both Gateway's beachfront Jacob Riis Park in Queens and Jamaica Bay to the meter station located at Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn, where it will then interconnect into the local natural gas distribution system serving the communities in and around my district. The pipeline project authorized in H.R. 2606 will help the Park Service in the face of severe fiscal constraints by authorizing the MPS to enter into a lease allowing the Gateway Pipeline project to meter and regulate a station inside one of the hangar buildings. The meter station is basically a secure building inside a building, with the hangar building's exterior being restored to its original condition, coupled with a lease payment that we expect NPS to put towards restoration of other hangar buildings for multi-purpose park uses. More importantly, however, is the fact that the Gateway Pipeline project will generate approximately $265 million in construction activity. That's almost 300 local jobs, 300 construction jobs, and that's about $8 million in annual local property taxes for New York City, providing a much-needed short-term and long-term boost to our local economy. When I came to Congress, I promised my constituents on Staten Island and in Brooklyn that I would find fiscally conservative ways to create jobs and get the country moving again. Mr. Speaker, this bill does exactly that. Not only will it create a unique public-private partnership to revitalize Floyd Bennett Field, but it also creates good-paying jobs and increases the supply of inexpensive natural gas. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Northern Mariana Islands.
Mr. Speaker, if the other side has no further speaker, I'm ready to yield back.
I'm prepared to yield back. The gentleman is.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge adoption of H.R. 2606 and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2606 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Gentleman from Washington.
I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. The point of no quorum is withdrawn. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1162 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 265, H.R. 1162, a bill to provide the Quileute Indian Tribe tsunami and flood protection and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Sablon, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Quileute Indian Reservation is located along the coast of the Olympic Peninsula in my home state of Washington. It consists of approximately 880 acres and is home to about 375 residents. Most of the reservation is located within the flood zone, and much of the tribal infrastructure, including their school, elder center, and housing, is with the tsunami zone. Recent tsunamis in the Pacific clearly demonstrate the risk faced by the tribe and the need to move housing and infrastructure inland. For the safety of this small tribe, this legislation is needed that would transfer a few hundred acres from the vast Olympic National Park to the tribe. This will allow them to move their school and other structures to safer land away from the threat of frequent flooding and tsunami risk. There are no park-owned facilities or trails in the transferred land, and there are few opportunities in this transferred land for park visitors. To expedite passage of the key objective of this bill and allow it to move forward promptly, the Natural Resources Committee deleted a potentially controversial 4,000-acre wilderness designation that is of no benefit to the tribe. The committee also added language borrowing transferred land from being used for gaming purposes, and the tribe does not oppose this limitation. So I believe these two changes have removed all potential obstacles that could threaten timely passage of this needed legislation that's offered by my friend and the ranking member of the Appropriation Committee, Mr. Dix. So I urge adoption of 1162, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Balance of his time. Gentleman from Northern Mariana Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend
Without objection.
my remarks. And I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 1162, legislation sponsored by the esteemed ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Dix. Events in Japan, Indonesia, and elsewhere have demonstrated the devastation that can be caused by tsunamis. The Quileute people live in a dangerous tsunami zone, and we fully support this legislation to allow the Quileute to move key facilities to higher ground. I would note, however, that this version of H.R. 1162 is only half of the bill as introduced. The Quileute, Mr. Dix, the National Park Service, and other stakeholders had negotiated over many years a version of this legislation that not only provided safety for the Quileute, but also sought to address the resource needs of Olympic National Park. The park portion of this bill was removed by the majority, despite the fact that the bill represented a popular negotiated compromise. During consideration of this measure in the Natural Resources Committee, the chairman suggested that the park portion of the original bill be introduced as a second bill to be moved separately. Mr. Dix has taken his advice, and we hope to see H.R. 3222 on the House floor in the very near future. Mr. Dix is to be commended for his diligent work on behalf of the Quileute people and the Olympic National Park, and we urge adoption of H.R. 1162, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Northern Mariana Islands.
Mr. Speaker, this time I recognize the esteemed ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Dix, for 5 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my
Without
remarks.
objection.
I rise to urge passage of H.R. 1162, the Quileute Tribe Tsunami and Flood Protection Bill. I also want to thank the House Natural Resources Committee for its work in shepherding this bill to the floor today. And I'm pleased that my good friend and colleague, Doc Hastings, chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, was on the floor here today to manage this bill, and the gentleman from Northern Marianas. I appreciate their comments and their leadership on this, along with Mr. Bishop and Mr. Grijalva. The Quileutes are one of 8 tribes living in the Washington State District that I represent here in Congress. Although the tribe's reservation at La Push is spectacularly beautiful, it also is a dangerous place to live. The threat of tsunamis is a harsh reality that the Quileute tribe faces every day. The tribe lives on a 1 square mile reservation along the Pacific coast of the Olympic Peninsula. And again, I cannot emphasize enough the breathtaking nature of their home. The tribe has received much notice over the last few years due to the Twilight series of movies and novels. If you're not familiar with the Twilight phenomenon yourself, then I am sure that at least your children or grandchildren know about the Quileutes and their role in the Twilight world. H.R. 1162 will provide land currently in Olympic National Park to the Quileute tribe to enable the relocation of many facilities outside the tsunami zone. We need only look to the tragedy last year in Japan to see the loss of human life and horrific damage that tsunamis can cause. Much of the Quileutes' infrastructure, including a daycare center, the Elder Center, government offices, and Quileute tribal member homes, are right in the path of a potential tsunami. This existential threat is compounded by damaging floods from the Quileute River nearly every year. The purpose of H.R. 1162 is help the Quileutes move their buildings and people to safer land. The Olympic National Park would transfer land that is out of the tsunami zone to the tribe for the development of new infrastructure. Of the 275 acres the Park Service would provide the tribe for this safety purpose, 222 are currently designated as wilderness. The legislation would de-designate these 222 acres. The legislation also settles a long-time standing dispute between the Olympic National Park and the tribe over the northern boundary of the reservation. The resolution of this dispute benefits the tribe, the Park Service, and the general public. The park would provide 510 acres to the tribe to settle the dispute. The bill would place into trust these two parcels as well as another piece of non-federal land the tribe had acquired earlier. The bill also guarantees access for the public to some of the most beautiful Washington state beaches. I must note, however, that I am disappointed that a provision of H.R. 1162 was taken from the bill when the Natural Resource Committee passed its last October. The legislation is introduced, mitigated the loss of wilderness designation for the 222 acres to be given to the tribe by designating other parcels already within Olympic National Park as wilderness. It was this provision designating new wilderness within the park that was removed. In response, I've introduced H.R. 3222 that would designate as wilderness those acres stripped from the underlying bill. The National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands Subcommittee held a hearing on H.R. 322 and other bills back in December, and I urge the committee to keep making progress on H.R. 3222. In closing, I want to recognize the Quileute tribe, its council and tribal chairs, past and present, along with the National Park Service Director, John Jarvis, and the Olympic National Park Superintendent, Karen Guston, for their hard work over many years to resolve this dispute and provide safer land for the tribe. And again, I want to thank Congressman Hastings, the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, and Todd Young and Todd Ungaret of his staff. I want to thank National Parks, Forest, and Public Land Subcommittee Chairman Rob Bishop and Jim Streeter of his staff. On the Democratic side, I want to thank Ed Markey and the gentleman from the Marianas and their staff, and Pete Modoff on my staff. In closing, I urge the House to pass H.R. 1162 to provide the Quileute tribe a safer home along the Pacific coast in Washington state, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I advise my friend I have no more requests for speakers. He's prepared to yield back on.
Gentleman from Northern Marianas.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance
Gentleman
of my
yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that this legislation is moving forward. I know this has been something that's been worked on by my friend and colleague from Washington for some time, and I'm glad we finally got this this far. And hopefully, now that it's a clean bill that really deals with the safety of the Quileute tribe, which is the important part, and that's the reason for the bill, I hope it can move very fast through this House and obviously through the Senate. And with that, I urge adoption of H.R. 1162 and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1162 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Point of no quorum is withdrawn. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess for a period of less than 15 minutes.
The House is recessing and will be back about 6:30 Eastern Time.